Today we're going to talk about control of breathing. Normal breathing, it's rhythmic. You can count your respirations. When you go to the doctor's office, a lot of times they'll do your pulse, they'll look at your respiration. It's involuntary act. We don't have to think about it, even though the muscles are a little bit under your voluntary control. Respiratory areas, groups of neurons in the brain, and specifically the brain stem, comprise the respiratory areas. So when I'm talking about respiratory areas, I'm not talking about lung area. Here I'm talking about in your brain, the part that controls it. So inside of your brain stem, there are areas that basically control your inspirations and your expirations. The rate, how fast it is, the depth, how much expansion and contraction there actually is. The medulla, or medulla oblongata, is part of that brain stem. So the medullary rhythmicity, and I struggle with that word, center includes two groups of neurons. There's the dorsal respiratory group and the ventral respiratory group. So basically it's split into a front and a back. So the ventral respiratory group is responsible for rhythm. So the basic rhythm of your breathing. And in our lab today we're going to measure your rate of breathing. The dorsal group deals more with muscle, or control of muscles. So it stimulates the respiratory muscles, especially in your diaphragm. Remember, when your diaphragm contracts, it pushes up. And when it relaxes, it's going to come down. Neurons in the pons, which is also part of your midbrain, form the pontine respiratory group. They may contribute to help with the rhythm of breathing. Notice this group is separate because there's less known about this group. These are your two main groups that you should know. So if I look at this, so midbrain area, pontine respiratory group is up here. Here I'm looking at ventral respiratory group is going to be towards the front. Dorsal is going to be towards the back. This area of your brain is the medulla oblongata. This area of your brain is the pons. So that's where the name comes from for those. Basically, all this shows, this table kind of just talks about what we just did. Both of them have a little bit to do with respiratory muscles. Here, ventral deals more with rhythm. Dorsal deals more with rate and the depth, or how much deep breathing you do. Factors that are going to affect your breathing. So obviously the respiratory areas in your brain that we just talked about. Chemicals will affect it. Lung tissue stretching, and that would deal with also with smoking, deals with exercise, and emotional state of effect. If you ever get nervous, what happens to your breathing? It's heavy, it increases, it's faster if you're nervous, things like that. So your emotional state will also affect your breathing. Chemosensitive areas, so chemoreceptors are going to pick up the chemicals, are associated with the respiratory center. Basically, they're going to measure carbon dioxide, the level of carbon dioxide, and the level of hydrogen ions that are in your lungs. Carbon dioxide being probably the main one. If carbon dioxide increases or rises, hydrogen, the reason hydrogen is even part of it is that's going to affect your pH. So if your pH decreases or those concentrations increase, the central chemoreceptors are going to signal to your brain, and the breathing rate is going to speed up. So if I get too much carbon dioxide, I'm going to breathe quicker. That may lead to what word you may have heard of? Hyperventilation. More CO2 is exhaled, blood and CFS levels fall, your breathing then returns to normal. Breathing rate will then slow down or decrease if your CO2 or hydrogen concentration level decreases, and it's going to decrease, it's going to build up your CO2 levels so that they are normal. Peripheral chemoreceptors, these are going to be carotid bodies, aortic bodies, so these are going to deal with your blood. So they sense changes in blood oxygen content. They transmit impulses, there again back to your brain, and they are going to contribute to your breathing rate and tidal volume that your lungs have. So blood oxygen levels must be very low to stimulate these receptors. So when you think blood, carotid, aortic, they measure oxygen, and that oxygen level would be extremely low before they're going to send a message to the brain. Oxygen plays a very minor role in your respiratory center. Obviously, oxygen is very important for our respiration, but CO2 levels are more important in signaling changes, if that makes sense. So carbon dioxide is the major determination in your breathing rate. There's just a picture. That one's probably not as important, other than here's the aortic bodies that are going to be found obviously on your aorta. Your carotid bodies are found right where your carotid artery branches. Inflation reflex, stretch receptors in your visceral pleura and your bronchioles, alveoli, they help prevent your lungs from overinflating. Wouldn't want your lungs to overinflate. They can't really, they're like a sponge. It's not like they're going to burst, but it can affect your breathing. Emotions we already talked about. Hyperventilation. So if you go into hyperventilation, that process will lower the amount of carbon dioxide in your blood. If you're breathing too fast, you're not going to how do I want to say this? You're not going to have enough carbon dioxide. So hyperventilation lowers the amount of carbon dioxide. What do people do? What's the normal process when you hyperventilate? You breathe in a bag. And if I'm breathing in a bag, I breathe out a lot of what? Carbon dioxide. So if I keep it in that bag, breathing in that bag is going to help me get more carbon dioxide back inside. So when you hyperventilate, I think a lot of people don't understand this. When you hyperventilate, your carbon dioxide level is too low. It's not your oxygen level, it's your carbon dioxide level that is too low. And that's why you breathe in a bag. And I'll stop there.